Hi, and welcome to Family Sociology. Now we're looking at gray power in the sunset years. Now, as we've seen, the Canadian population is aging. This chapter begins with defining the different dimensions of aging. Like all stages of life, old age has certain developmental tasks, and there's issues specific to this time of life. The dramatic increase in the numbers of elderly will affect all Canadians. So we're going to look at how this impact may be felt. There's going to be more jobs in the occupations that cater to older people, and many of you are taking this course may end up working in services that are oriented to the elderly. The availability of services will be important to the growing number of seniors. The need to pay for these services will be a concern for all Canadians. So let's look at gray power in the sunset years. Now we're going to begin by considering the dimensions of aging. The popular myth about the elderly can be misleading. The time clock for becoming older is less clear-cut, but it still exists. Old age is being redefined. Rather than one single group, old age, experts now see three. The young old, this is for people the age of 65 to 64. The old, 75 to 84. And then the old, 85 and older. Now we can look at age via four dimensions. There's the chronological. Chronological age is the number of years old you are. Many people who write about old age use 65 as the starting off mark for old age. In fact, 65 is a relatively new standard. It used to be younger and was mentioned that we were now dividing the old group from one group to three. So that's chronological, the number year that you celebrate for your birthday. What am I going to be, 63 or 64? Something like that. Any rate, physical age, number 2, physical age. How are men and women viewed as they get older? White hair, wrinkles, physical condition, and other related things. These are the many variables that affect aging. The term lifespan is replaced with health span. So the physical component is just what physical changes do we go through as we grow older. 3. The psychological age, the state of mind. You're only as old as you feel. My mom was renowned for always saying she never felt much older than 30. Until I got to be 30, then she was going to be no older than 40. She always felt young for herself. That's the psychological age. In spite of what physical and what chronological age, there's a psychological age. This state of mind, like I said, where you don't feel as old as you are. And that's where people believe that aging is a frame of mind. It's difficult to find qualities that are characteristic of most elderly, very much like other groups of people. They show more differences than similarities, as do younger people. And then the fourth area is what's known as social age. So how are you supposed to act? The cultural norms for the age. Timing of markers and events such as what age is it best to be a grandparent, widowhood, retirement, are all changing. If we think about aging in Canada, check the table and the infographic in your textbook that I have in behind here. The population of Canada is becoming older because people are living longer. The oldest members of the baby boom bulge have started to retire and are swelling the number of seniors. Since birth rate is down, fewer younger Canadians are born to offset the increase of the older population. According to Stats Canada, seniors ages 65 and older account for a record high 14.8% of the population of Canada in 2011. That was up from 13.7 5 years earlier. The 2011 census counted 5,825 people over the age of 100. It's surprising the number of people who think most seniors live in an old age home. In fact, only about 8% are in homes. And that's an important note when we were looking back in single parents and about widowhood and currently about age, is that most of our experiences might be because of our specialty, because my dad's in a home, my mom has passed away, and she was being looked after at home. So you get this perspective that that's how most of the elderly are, and in fact, that's not the case. Most of those were women who were in those nursing homes and over 85. 92% of people over 65 live in private households. 79% of men, 49% of women, as part of a couple, married or common law. It's through home ownership that seniors can maintain and support their independence. Elderly renters are more likely to be institutionalized. Considering health and other interests as people grow older, physical well-being and concerns about possible or actual illness become important. Those over 75 are more likely to have chronic health problems or disability. Most common are vision, mobility, memory problems are the three most common. Lower income individuals at greater risk for illness and death than those with higher incomes. Wealth and health, they go hand in glove. The vast majority of seniors live in private households, and often overlooked are the number of seniors caring for other seniors. Maybe they're carrying a spouse or caring for a friend or a neighbor. Caregiving of seniors often ends when the mental or physical health of the older person makes it impossible for the family to cope any longer. Now, whether seniors live in their own home with a child or in an institution, family members, especially daughters, feel the duty to provide care, even if they have other responsibilities such as their own children or a job. The sociological perspective on aging, the term gerontology is the study of aging and the elderly. Structural functionalists, they're supportive of society where we age, we move aside so that the youth can take over. Thus, we have retirement. This process is based on disengagement theory, and we won't bother going into detail on that. Conflict theorists suggest that the elderly don't give up their positions willingly. Instead, they are discriminated against, known as ageism. Ageism is the prejudice and discrimination based on age. Now, that's not applied just to the elderly. It can be applied to younger people as well. Symbolic interactionists, they see our development as a lifelong process of development through social interactions, the face-to-face that we have, the micro. Volunteering is something that's very big for the elderly. Social interaction and engagement is important. Feminists remind us aging affects men and women differently. Women are more likely to be widowed and to experience poverty. Family relationships, well, the key task for older people is to accept shift of roles and allow the next generation to take over leadership in private and in public life. As we age, we often reflect on our lives and we look for order and meaning in our lives. Without a sense that life has had meaning or purpose, we can sink into despair. Few differences in adjustment to old age between homosexual and heterosexual men and women. There are three key issues regarding relationships between older people and their families: independence versus dependence, connection versus separateness, and openness versus privateness. Let's look at each one carefully. Independence versus dependence. As people age, the ability to remain independent is really important, both in terms of our financial status and our physical and mental condition. So the two sources of stress and frustration of not being able to do tasks as they once did, and a shift into how others treat them. Home ownership often allows seniors to maintain their independence. Homeowners significantly less likely to be institutionalized than those who rent. Living in a nursing home greatly reduces independence. 2012, 200,000 Canadians, relatively few, lived in residences for the aged. 2. The connectedness versus separateness. The struggle for independence often reflects tension between desire for connectedness and separateness. Older people have value their relationship with their children and grandchildren, yet also wish to maintain their own unique lifestyle. You may have noticed the number of older Canadians have jumped into social media is pretty significant. 3. Openness versus privateness. Privacy may become precious in the face of retirement, widowhood, sickness, and institutionalization. Some find it preferable to obtain care from a stranger than from a family member. If someone is cared for by a relative or living in a nursing home, private life is virtually impossible. Let's touch on family relationships, and we're going to start with the couple relationship. A majority of older people live with a family member, usually a spouse. An increased number of older women are divorced. The sexual relationship remains important in old age. More men are likely to remarry following a death or a divorce from a spouse. More eligible women than men because men tend to die a little earlier in their life. A significant result of seniors being sexually active has been an increase in STIs, sexually transmitted diseases, and HIV. With a more weakened immune system and a misguided thought that their age exempts them, about 12 to 20% of all new HIV cases are attributed to seniors over age 65. That was from 2016. Now, adult children may actively discourage remarriage because they see it as a disloyalty to the deceased parent or because they are worried about their inheritance. And as sad as that is, that's becoming a bigger issue with the boomers getting older. Let's look at the relationship of the older couple or the older individual and with their siblings. Most young old people have at least one living sibling. The quality of sibling relationships doesn't usually undergo dramatic changes as people age. Siblings' experience of growing up in the same family often draws them together. Illness and death of a parent may influence the siblings' relationship. With retirement and empty nest, siblings often increase contact. Sisters are closest, followed by brothers and sisters pairs. Now, those who have never married and are childless widows depend most on their siblings. The relationship with children, well, most older people have at least one child with whom they are in touch most often. Closest relationships usually between mothers and daughters. Married children are not as close to parents as divorced or separated, or especially the newly married. Childless older people may have active social networks that take the place of children. When a partner is absent or unable to provide help, children often provide support. However, the parent-child relationship is not one-sided. When adult children have crises such as a divorce, widowhood, or the birth of a child with health problems, parents are the key providers of supports. The relationship with grandchildren, as a population ages, increasingly common for several generations to know each other. The relationship between grandparents and grandchildren is considered special because it's not complicated by parental responsibilities. Grandchildren tend to be close to grandparents with whom their parents have good relationships. Grandparents can have a positive effect on grandchildren. Grandparents are particularly important to young adult grandchildren who regard them as important sources of emotional gratification and conveyors of family histories and traditions. Grandfathers tend to have less contact with grandchildren compared to grandmothers. Now, divorce has an impact on grandparenting. As a number of step-grandparents is growing, many grandparents provide care for their grandchildren. Grandparents, especially grandmothers, are an important child care source for working parents, either for the whole day or before and after school. Grandparents caring for grandchildren, well, in 2011, about 600,000 grandparents provided part-time or some full-time care for their grandchildren. Indigenous and immigrant families are more likely to live with grandparents. This is sometimes to benefit the overall family experience. Indigenous families encourage children to help and support the elders. Many grandparents provide some level of childcare, less costly than formal childcare options for parents who work. Not all the experiences are a result of good reasons or have good results, and can be because of death or illness of a parent that prompts a grandparent's role to be needed. On that theme, death of a family member, we can consider an example of terminal illness. Terminal illness can be very stressful on families. Both the dying person and his or her relative must face the deterioration of physical and or mental powers. The family has to, prepare for the actual death and for the changes that occur in lifestyle and relationship. A lack of openness may affect the ability to talk about matters such as prolonging life once the quality of life has been destroyed. Death and its aftermath, funerals, are families' times when relatives gather together. And until the funeral is over, family members often forget differences and often assist one another to get through this troubling time. Along that same vein, when one has to adjust to the reality of widowhood. Widowhood initially involves the sense of loss, disorientation, and loneliness. And this is true for cohabitating and same-sex couples. Women who have centered their lives on their husbands and family often feel loss of identity and status. For some, however, the death comes as a bit of a relief. For example, when one's partner has suffered for a long time, or the relationship has been unhappy or abusive, women tend to manage better than men after a death of a spouse. Men fare worse because they've usually depended on their wives for emotional support. In the first year following death of a spouse, more men than women will suffer an increase in death and suicide rates. In association with this economics of death, often death of a spouse means a drop in family income. Long-term hardships tend to be greater for women since they often have had limited financial resources, for example, pensions. They may not have worked full-time, or if they did, they had childbirth and raising interrupt their earning ability. Minority groups and aging, well, if we consider immigrants, cultures differ greatly in how they view and review regarding how responsible middle generation should be for the elderly. Certain ethnic groups have strong beliefs about not abandoning relatives to nursing homes. Older people may feel isolated and ashamed, both because they are away from family and community and because elders are traditionally cared for within family. Nursing homes designed for the specific ethnic group help reduce the feeling of being cut off from one's culture. Recent immigrants are more likely to live in 3-generational households than those born in Canada, especially if from Asia or Latin America. Now, elderly immigrants living and aging in Canada face many challenges. There's language barriers, a disappearance of traditional social networks, an inability to access economic resources. When they join children in Canada, elders leave behind familiar attitudes towards seniors and customary ways of life. Children may have adopted new streams of cultural norms. They may fall within the mainstream of what is now Canada for them. Older immigrants may thus feel further displaced. Indigenous people, currently Indigenous children under the age of 6, are more likely to be living with grandparents than non-Indigenous children. Traditionally, grandparent generation among Indigenous people was responsible for socializing children, and in return, grandchildren had the honor and responsibility of helping grandparents remain independent. Elder role is eroding through the coming of Christian missions and accompanying residential schools, which remove children from their schools, from their homes, and from their cultures. It was during the 60s and the 70s that many children were apprehended by child welfare authorities and placed in non-Indigenous foster and adoptive families. Now the role of family is being taken on by a community through services such as home support for the elderly and on-reserve nursing homes. Recent renewal of interest in traditional Indigenous ways, elders once again are reintroduced as valued custodians and transmitters of traditional culture. In 2001 survey found about half of Indigenous children living off reserves who could understand or speak an Indigenous language had learned it from a grandparent. Some other issues relating to seniors and social policies is one of those areas, and we'll look at economic factors. Canadian retirement income system is made up 3 pillars. Old age security for those ages 65, even if they're retired, guaranteed income supplement if individuals have little or no retirement income. So that's 1. 2, the Canadian pension plan, the Quebec pension plan. It's the CPP and the QPP. Payments based on how much an individual contributed over his or her lifetime. And then 3, any private pensions or savings that one might have. Company pensions, RSPs, still many inequities in pensions. Women are more disadvantaged there. Women are more likely to work part-time. Usually they don't work as many hours or as many years as men and may take time off to care for children, as I mentioned earlier. More women than men work in service occupations where there are no pensions. Women often earn less than men do. So if we consider the area of caring for seniors, well, there's many issues here, and more older people than younger, therefore fewer supports. Financial, one's marital status, living arrangements, availability of living situation, there's so much at play. So what role ought a government play? Well, family tends to bear the largest responsibility for the elderly. This has been in part of the quality of care. Families are busy, and I'll mention this because we'll get to it later in another chapter, in the sandwich generation, and we'll define that later. The cost of additional care. There are some government programs like tax benefits for informal care, including supports in Ontario for unpaid medical leave. Canada Pension Plan is adjusted every 3 years to best be able to meet family needs, but there's still much needed innovation as the older generation continue to age. There is a lack of a number to financially support young people when they get older. We're getting to a difficult point in time where if you look at a population triangle, it should look like this. Lots of young people, lots of childbearing years, and very few older people. Ours is looking more like a muffin. We don't have as many young people. We don't have as many people producing children, but we have a lot of people getting older. And so that's going to have a huge impact on family, on government, on education, on healthcare. So this is just one more of the issues that we can look at when we look at family, and that is the aging population. Thank you, everybody. We are now done, and we'll be moving on to the next chapter next week. Bye for now.